Okay, let me try this again here, and we'll pick back up where we left off. I had some technical difficulties there, so this is going to be kind of the second part of this study in Hebrews' second chapter. But the next question we have is, how did Christ conquer death? Is the question we have. And so that goes along with verse 14. Is inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil. And here what we have is a paradox, basically, in that we have deity coming down in the form of flesh. And that's why he says the first part here, have partaken of flesh and blood. He was Emmanuel. As you go over Matthew, the first chapter, we find that phrase used referring to Christ. And of course, why did he do that? So that he himself should share in the same. He'd be like us, and that he was going to die on the cross. And here's the paradox in all this, and that is Jesus had to die in order to conquer death. And therefore, that's what we have Jesus doing when he was raised out of the grave. And so, how had the power? Who had the power of death? Basically, is the question then, and that is the devil. And so, that Jesus, through his death on the cross, through the resurrection, that he actually conquered the power of death. And it's what the Hebrew writer is trying to get across to us. And so, don't get caught up in the idea. And again, you have to keep in mind the audience. And these were Jews, and I'm sure some of their family members, as they obeyed the gospel, some of their family members said, tell me again how you're saved through somebody who died. That he died. I mean, after they buried him, well, that he didn't stay dead, that he was raised out of the grave. And that's what in verse 15 goes on. It says, and released those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. And that's talking about us. And the Bible points out in passages such as 1 Corinthians 15 chapter and other passages that from the time of Adam, when Adam and Eve sinned against God, death reigned. Everybody died until the coming of Christ. And then Jesus came, and through his resurrection, he actually overcame the power of death. But mankind by himself is in fear of death, basically, that we have this fear of death, and that we are in bondage to it. And the idea of slavery here, I think, is very good wording here. And that is a slave was a slave for a lifetime. And that if you were a slave, you were going to serve as a slave the rest of your life until your death. And so here's the case that mankind, as who lived here, was in fear of death until Christ came, and therefore he overcame that death. He conquered it on our account. Then the next question is, whose seed did he take on? Well, verse 16. For indeed it does not give aid to angels. And that's one thing kind of keep this in mind. Jesus did not come down here to save the angels. Jesus came down here who? But last part of verse 16 said, but he does give aid to the seed of Abraham. And so the seed of Abraham, that phrase is used. And when we think about all the way back to the Garden of Eden, in the third chapter, when Adam and Eve have sinned against God, that God had promised there that the seed of woman would crush the head of Satan. When God talked to Abraham later on, he says, through your seed, all the nations there should be blessed. And so this seed of Abraham, who is this? Was those who have the faith of Abraham. In John the 8th chapter 39, that Jesus is having a dispute with many Jews on that occasion. And basically he's saying, you're like your father. Well, they answered in verse 39, so they answered said to him, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, if you are Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. Those who do the works of Abraham, that's the seed of Abraham. They have the faith of Abraham. So it's not by lineage, it is by faith. And in Romans 4, verse 16, therefore is of faith I might be according to grace, so the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, in other words, the Jews, but also those who are the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. It reminds me of the children's song. And that children's song is Father Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons had he. And then it goes in and talks about, I am one of them, and so are you. And the idea, again, is that all who obey God, all who accept Jesus are of the seed of Abraham. That's who, basically going back to the question, whose seed did he take on? Well, the seed of mankind, but the seed of Abraham, that he came to help them, is who he came to help. The next question, what kind of high priest is Christ? That's the first time here in Hebrews that wording is used, high priest. And as you look at verse 17, now it says, therefore, and therefore is always an important word, and that is because just what he got through saying. Well, just get through saying. Well, he's talking about Jesus is a sanctifier, and we are sanctified. Jesus is not afraid to call us his brethren, that we are all sons of God by adoption, that Jesus came to aid us, to die for us. And so as you look at this, verse 17, therefore, because all these things, and all things he had to be made like his brethren. Again, explaining why he left heaven and come down here. He had become one of us. And in the old law, the priesthood were people, that they were of the lineage of Aaron. The high priest was Aaron, and then the oldest son from him on. And so they were like all the Jews. In fact, one of the complaints that was one time lodged when the children of Israel was out there in the wilderness wandering around is, why is Levi, or the tribe of Levi, get to be the priesthood? Because God says so. And so as you look at this here, it said that he may be like us. Okay, he may become like that. He might be merciful and faithful high priest in all things pertaining to God. And it goes on and said, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. Now, the high priest here is very important because his role under the law of Moses was he was the one that once a year would go into the most holy of holy places inside the temple, and he would make the atonement sacrifice for the sins of the people, for the reconciliation, to bring the people back into fellowship with God, we may say. And so, but the thing about it is that the priests that are in the Old Testament, if you start looking at it, that they weren't always good. And even sometimes the high priest got involved and was corrupt, and so they weren't really trustworthy. But this person, they talk about the fact that Jesus is our high priest, but he said not just high priest, but also merciful and faithful high priest. Now, mercy here is the idea of what the high priest extends to us, and the idea that through him we receive mercy through the Old Testament, that they would go to priesthood, offer sacrifice, so that they would be forgiven by God, to receive God's mercy. And so in that case there, it was a case where the high priest was kind of like in between God and man. But he's also trustworthy. That is, he's trustworthy to God. He's faithful to God. Where, again, some of the others in the Old Testament were not trustworthy. They sinned. And so he said that's why we have this great high priest. He's merciful and faithful in all things pertaining to God. And then we have this word propitiation. And not a word we use very often. It means the idea of to appease the anger, to appease the wrath of God. It is literally the idea of offering a sacrifice so as to make reconciliation God possible. And maybe kind of like, and I often use this example, the husband and wife, where the husband gets in an argument with wife, and then later on in the day, he realizes he's wrong, and so now she's angry at him, so he thinks, what can I do to soothe her anger? And so he may do something. He may buy her flowers or candy, or he'll do something to try to get on her good side, we say. Well, when you look at this here and understand what this refers to, is that what is unique about this is what if the wife actually already had the flowers outside the front door, so you could pick them up and bring them inside to her to appease her wrath. Well, you say, well, that doesn't happen. Well, it happened here with God. And that is, man sins against God, man incurs the wrath of God, but God provided the sacrifice that soothed his anger. And so that's the idea being in that word propitiation for the sins of the people. And it's literally the idea of the mercy seat. Again, back to the Old Testament where he had the Ark of the Covenant and he had this mercy seat. Well, that's the idea of propitiation. That was the seat of propitiation, the seat of mercy right there. And then, why is Christ so well able to succor or aid those who are tempted? And here in verse 18 it says, for in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to aid those who are tempted. And that is that he knows what it's like. Now, by tempted here means there's been trials. He had gone through trials in life. He suffered on the cross. He knows what it means to suffer. And so it's not the case where we say, well, he is so perfect that he cannot relate to us. Yes, he can relate to us because of what he endured on the cross. And so he came to help those who are in need. And he's able to relate to us because of what he did suffer. And so we have that as far as our study. Then in Hebrews, the 2nd chapter. I hope this has been useful to you. I apologize for the technical problem we have, and you don't have to click on two places here to actually see the completion of the letter. But I hope this has been useful to you. Hebrews, like I said, is a little bit different, and some in-depth arguments, but the main point always is Jesus is superior. If you can, come be with us at Lilac Road. Our building is located 1687 Lilac Road, Litchfield, Kentucky. Time of services Sunday morning at 9:30, Bible class, and then 10:25 worship. Wednesday night at 7 p.m. we have worship. If you need to contact me and need to ask questions or anything to do help your study, then you can either contact me by commenting on this video. You can share the video, by the way, or you can email me we the Tuckers, all lowercase, we the Tuckers at yahoo.com, and I'll be glad to answer you. But I hope everybody's doing well, and take care.